Welcome back to this video. We will now go ahead and implement the booking of a specific flight. So open up your book flight component.ts, and you can also open up the book flight component.html, so the attached template. And you can see here, when you scroll a little bit down, that we got that booking here. Cart, book button, right, number of seats, and we will implement all of that so that we can really book a flight later on. Now switch back to the book flight component and we will start here. Again, we for sure need the form builder. So let's go ahead and import it. Import form builder from add Angular/forms. Now for sure go into the constructor, take it here, private form builder, or let's call it FB equals to form builder. You can see most of the stuff is really repetitive, right? So once you understand the core logic of Angular, you will see that you most of the time repeat always the same structure. It's the same for RESTful API development. If you have a new endpoint, you probably want to save something, read something, or delete something, right? Doesn't have to be a book flight, could also be a user, a hotel booking, just a product for your store or whatever. So most of the stuff in web development, is nearly always the same, but for sure that doesn't apply to algorithms. Now let's create a form here under flight. Form equals to this form builder dot group, and inside that we will create a new form, and we only have one single field inside there, and it's a number, and the default value is 1. So how many seats do you want to book for the flight, right? Now let's create a new method at the very bottom. Let's call it book, and that book method will simply write down a log for now. So console.log. Go ahead and write down booking this dot form dot get number. We need to check if it's null. If not, we take the value. Passengers for the flight. Let me just scroll over here for the flight. This dot flight dot ID. We got that here in this field, flight, right? And our form, we got that here, and we simply take the number. So yeah, that's a long line of code, so you can go ahead in the source code and check for book flight component and copy it if you like. Yeah, and well, inside of that string, we use our fields. Great, so let's save it. That's all we have to do here. So keep in mind that we now have a form inside of our component. Now we can switch back to our HTML. And here we don't have to do so many changes, right? Just a couple of them. First of all, let's go ahead and switch that div here to a form. First of all, let's create a new form tag. There we go. And let's copy everything inside so that it looks just like this. Now we can remove that break here. That's fine. So we got that form. And now we can go into the form tag and assign it. So form group equals to our form field inside of the component. And when we submit it, we want to hook it to run a method inside of our component. So ng submit, right? That's the hook, that's the event. In the moment where you click a button, that one here, which is of type submit, right? So if I click that button, the ng submit event will fire, and then we can simply go ahead and call a method inside of our component, which is book, which is right here. Now, go into the input field. Here we got the number, so how many flights or seats do you want to book? Gonna go ahead, form, control, name, and we bind it to number. So this is all we have to do for now. Let's start our application, see if we got that console log. When I search for flight and I click on book, I now for sure have to register. So let me quick do that. And then I click on login. When I search again, I can now book a flight. Here I got the number of seats. Let me write down 5 and then book. You can see booking 5 passengers for the flight D whatever, that good here. Right, okay, so the information of the form And also the GUID of the flight are looking perfectly, so that's very nice. And now we can go ahead and create an endpoint in our RESTful API to really receive the information that we will send from here. Inside of our project, go ahead to DTOs, and here we got that new passenger DTO, and we will now create a new one. So right click on it, add a new C# class, simply select the class here, and let's call it book DTO. There we go. And now we will for sure make this a record again. So public record, remove the curly braces. Instead, take default parameter ones or constructor ones or whatever. Public record, and we got a GUID here. Flight ID. Next up, we got string passenger email and byte number of seats. So these are the informations that we really need, right? So which passenger wants to book which flight, how many seats in that flight. So those are the informations we want to receive when we are talking about bookings. Why are we using a byte here? So actually we can use a value up to 255, and number of seats will probably be below that. So if we have like 300 seats, I want to book 300 seats, then it wouldn't work because byte doesn't have that range. But that's very, very uncommon, right? So it's more like I want to book 1 seat or 3 seats or maybe 5 or 7 or 8, but not something like over 255. Great. So always keep in mind that when you're working in web development, you want to have the smallest amounts of data to be transferred between the endpoints to make it really fast. So there for sure is a difference if you're sending like 100 kilobyte or 10 kilobyte or 1 megabyte, right? There's a huge difference between the speeds. So just try to send over some huge images. Just imagine a website which has non-optimized images on the page. So you have a JPEG which has like 20 MB in size, and then go ahead and try to load it. You will have to wait, depending on your internet speed, a couple of seconds. And when you're on mobile, you maybe even have to wait a minute, right? So just to get that page loading. So always keep in mind in web development, try to optimize for byte size. Great. Now we got our book DTO ready. Open up the controllers and head over to the flight controller. Now, first of all, let's add a using directive DTO. For sure, flights.dtos. There we go. And then scroll down so that we can create a new endpoint. So I'm here right below the find action result. And now we're creating a new one, which is book for sure. So here we're talking about HTTP post because we are sending in the information of who wants to book a flight, how often, and we will create something, right? So if someone wants to book a flight, we will create that record of that information on the server. So we create something, so we use HTTP post. Let's call it public void book, and for sure it's taken a book DTO, right? Remember, DTOs are data transfer objects. So those informations which get sent over the internet or over the connection. All right, now let's add some write line here. System.diagnostics.debug.writeLine. And we want to write down the information, booking a new flight. And now let's simply add the DTO.flight ID so that we know which flight is getting booked right now. Booking a new flight, DTO flight ID. All right, so that's great, that's working. And now for sure, we want to store the information, right? So if we hit that endpoint here, we for sure need to save it anywhere. So scroll to the very top, and here where we got our flight array, right? It's a static array. We go ahead and do nearly the same. Static private iList of data type book DTO. Let's call it bookings equals to new list of book DTO. There we go. So we have a new static list, static again, to make it available during the entire runtime. If we don't do that, it will only be available for a single request. So you would never get more information about previous bookings. You would only have your current information. So make it static definitely. And now we can go ahead inside of our book endpoint that we have just created. Yeah, and then add this DTO to that list. So bookings.add, let's add that DTO. So now let's start our application using debugging mode to see that console log. So hit run to start the debugger. and then go to our Swagger UI. And here you can now see our new post endpoint, right? Don't forget that the name of the method in C# is completely unrelated. The name is only driven by the attribute, and since we haven't provided any information, only HTTP post attribute, it will take the name from the flight controller and create the post endpoint with exactly the same name. So open it up. You can see the example value here. That's fine. Click on try it out. Let's leave everything as it is. Go to number of seats, add 5 for example, hit execute. You should now see a 200 response code. And when you go to your application and take a look at the output, you should be able to see booking a new flight with that ID. So our endpoint is for sure working and the DTO got added to the bookings list. Nice. Okay, now we can switch over to Angular again and regenerate the client API and then finally connect both together so that we can post from Angular into our RESTful API. Now we need to regenerate our client API because we made changes and added a new endpoint, right? So simply right click on the client app folder, open in terminal, and now as always run the npx ng -openapi -gen command. So npx ng openapi -gen, and that should actually update our client API. And you can see road book DTO flight service, and inside of that flight service we will now have our book flight endpoint. Now we need to post the book flight form to the server, and we will also use the current user email which the user has registered with. So this is why we needed the user to be registered. Because in the end, if you want to make a flight booking, you want to know which user, so which email address, for example, booked which flight and how many seats. And for sure, we could be able to simply go ahead and in a moment where you book a flight, also say what's your email address. But later on, you might be interested in adding a functionality for registration. And that's a huge step forward, which we made. I mean, actually, it's not saved in a database, and passwords are not compared, for example, right? But it's a huge preparation for a later step. Now move to the bookflight component.ts. So open client app folder, bookflight component.ts. And inside here, we now use our auth service that we got right here. And we already got it covered inside of the constructor. So go into the book method that we have just created right here. And now we will use it. So let's extend the functional code here. Const booking is equals to a new object, flight ID equals to this dot flight dot ID, passenger email. I guess you can see that we are talking here about the book DTO, right? This dot auth service dot current user, check if it's null. If not, take the email, number of seats, this dot form dot get number, again null check dot value. So this will in the end be our book DTO because we got the flight ID, the passenger email from our auth service from the current user, very important, right? So the user needed to be registered in order to book a flight, so we got that email, and number of seats from the form. Great. Now let's finally call that endpoint, this dot flight service dot book flight. There we go. That one got created when we updated our client API. Let's send in the booking. You can see it's matching, right? Booking. Now subscribe to it again. This time we again run a function, an arrow function, console.log, succeeded. And we for sure wanna console log the errors. Now you can see that error here. And if you want to know what's the issue, you can go ahead and instead of leaving it like const booking, you can see the data type is not matching. Say it's type of book DTO to see where the issue is. Book DTO. There we go, book DTO. And now we will see, okay, flight ID, he doesn't know that. So flight ID, same will go for passenger email, same will go for number of seats. Now, afterwards, you can see that he's still complaining, so hold the cursor above it. Type book DTO has no properties in common with type body book DTO undefined. So what we do is we create a new object here inside that, and we say body is equals to booking. So now we fixed all the issues. Okay, I wanted to show you how to fix these errors because I want you to get confident enough to handle those Angular errors on your own later on, especially when it comes to TypeScript. Let's save it like this. And now let's test our whole process again. So go ahead into the flight controller. There we go, flight controller, and set the breakpoint here in booking. So just in that line of code, for example, where we console log it, right? Go ahead and start the application using the debugger mode. And now let's go through the whole process. So here we are at home. Let's search for flight. That sounds nice here. Take the book flight. Now we need to register. Let me enter some values. Afterwards, click on login. You can now search again, but we are signed in the background. So book again. Now I can book the flights. Let's say 10 seats. Let me hit book. Our breakpoint should be activated now. In the DTO, you can see flight ID and number of seats and email address. So all the information that we want to have are now got sent from Angular to our RESTful API backend. That's perfect. Now let's continue with that. Let's refresh the page here. And now we again have to log in. So jl@dev.com, that was the one I was using. It's still recognized in the background, but every time we want to book a flight here, we have to sign in, right? So we have to adjust this user flow of the pages a little bit so that it makes a little bit more sense, right? Because when I here go ahead and click on search for the very first time and then register, and then I get sent back to search flights again. So we want to adjust that flow to make it a little bit easier for the user and a little bit less confusing, but that's not a problem at all. First of all, focus on the functionality and then on the user experience. Great, so now let's move on. Lately, we just created a new service in Angular. Now let's talk about service provider scopes. Depending on how you create the service, you tell the dependency injection framework which components can share the same instance of the service. You can share a service across all classes of the application. You can share it only between the classes of a single module, or you can create a new instance every time a new component is instantiated. When you set the provided in attribute of the decorator to root, you tell the dependency injection framework that a single instance of the service should be shared across all classes that ask for it. Most of the time, you need to provide your service in the root injector. To share a single instance of the service to all classes of a single module and not to the other modules, you can simply add the service class to the provider section of the module. You can simply add the service class to the provided section of the module or set the provided in attribute to the module. If you register a service at the component level, you get a new instance by each instantiation of the component. Or you can set the component as the provided in attribute of the service. To learn more about service providers and scopes, you can visit https://angular.io/guide/providers. Welcome to this video. We will now focus on creating a new component called My Booking List. So once you have booked a flight, you should have a list where you can see all your booked flights. So maybe if you book 3 or 4 flights, you should have a page where you can see, all right, I booked that flight and this flight and even that one here. So we start with generating a new component. Go ahead to your client app folder, right click on it, open in terminal, and for sure we again run a command to generate a new component. So npx ng gc npx angular generate component, call it my -bookings and attach it to module app. Now let's hit enter, and again you can see that we have new component information right here and that module got created. Now let's add a route to it. So go in client app and then open up app module. Let me just close some folders here. App module. You can see here my bookings component. So let's scroll down a little bit until we come to the path again. Let's just copy it and paste it so that we have a new path entry. Let's set the endpoint or the page path to my booking, just like that. And the component is for sure my booking component. That's all we have to do. As I said, it's a lot of repetition, so every time you add something, you most likely want to do exactly the same stuff over and over again. And now after booking a flight, in our bookflight component.ts, go ahead and open it up. Bookflight component.ts. Scroll a little bit down until you come to book flight. You can find that just here in book flight, right? afterwards, in subscribe, go ahead and use the router to navigate to our new path. So we can keep that arrow function here and the console error log, but we should get rid of console log succeeded here. Just go ahead and call this router.navigate, and then we pass in our path. So /my booking. There we go. Now let's save it like this. We got the information about how we should get routed after we booked. So we have a new component, we have set up the route, and now we even have that navigate call, so we can go ahead and try that out real quick. So once I registered and logged in and book a flight here, number of seats 1, let me book that. We should get redirected to our My Booking endpoint or My Booking page, which is here, My Booking works. So the component is working fine, the redirection too. Now let's switch over to our REST API side and head over to the flight controller. So open up controllers folder, flight controller, and now use everything you have learned to, well, complete that booking endpoint here. So first of all, we for sure have that produces response type of 400. So for client-side errors. Got that for 500 for internal server errors. We got one for 404. We can also go ahead and use status dot status 404 not found, and again produces response type of 200. So those are the attributes we should use here. 200 for succeeding, 404 for okay. I wasn't able to find anything. For example, I wasn't able to find the flight, right? 404 couldn't find flight, or 500 for missing database connection or whatever, and 400 for client-side error. Now, as we have learned, we should make all of those HTTP endpoints that we have here always of type action result. So let's do that. Go ahead and use iActionResult. And as you can see, we don't really have to use a type. So here we used of type flight read model, for example, but we don't have to use it here. Well, you can see that purple underline, which is indicating that we have to restart the application to apply the changes because the application is running in the background using hot reload. Now, we for sure have to return something. So let's return. And as I said, it's HTTP post. So we create something. So we should return a created at action. And this time it's name of find. So we go ahead and create a URI to that find right here, right? It's finding a flight read model, and the new ID is set to dto.flightID. So if we create a booking, we get a response, and in the response you can find the URI to the, well, booked flight. That should be enough for this scenario. Now, as I said, we could potentially have the problem to have the DTO containing a flight which is not existing. So let's go ahead and check for that. So right above our booking ads, let's go ahead and write the code flight equals to flights. This is our static list, right? Don't forget that. .any. You can see this is a Boolean. So does it contain flight where the flight has the ID of our DTO.flightID? Right, so do we have a flight which has the DTO flight ID? Oh yeah, since this is an expression, we go ahead and use an operator for sure. So, okay, so now let's check if we have a flight or if we don't have a flight, if flight equals to false. So remember, any returns a bool, not an object. So we don't have that flight model. We have a bool here, so flight is a bool. If flight equals to false, or we can even go ahead and rename it if you like. If flight found, for example, would be a better name for bool, right? So if flight found equals to false, we go ahead and return, there we go, and not found. All right, now we have that handled. So in case we don't have a flight, the user will now see 404 error. Now one last time, let's switch back to our book flight component. We still have that opened here, book flight component.ts. Let me add a line break here, subscribe. Then we have that navigation and we have console error. Let's change this console.error to this.handle error. Right, this is what we have created already. You can simply select it and press F12. You'll get directed exactly to the definition, handle error, and you can see if status 404 flight not found. So we got that implemented now. Cool, great. So everything is set up now, and we have even took care about Well, the API documentation from that one here, and also about some situations like what if we don't have a flight from client side and web API side. Great. So this is enough RESTful development for today. Let's go ahead and switch over to a completely different topic. Just a small chapter on that for today, which is about styling. Now let's talk about styling and how you can adjust it, or we will adjust it a little bit. So open up the client app folder and open the app folder here and then search for appcomponent.html. So don't use the TypeScript one, use the HTML template. Angular's router renders the routed components into the router outlet exactly right here. For example, the register passenger component is dynamically loaded into the app component by the router outlet. The app component is also loaded into the index.html file by the main module. So if I want to add header and footer to all pages, I can simply add them to the app component. Well, let's do that in practice right now. Great, so now that you know that everything here is rendered inside the router outlet, and if we want to go ahead and add a footer and a header, for example, we can do that here. Let's go ahead and first of all add a new CSS sheet for some styling. So go into the app folder here, right click on it and add a new item. There we go. And we can simply search for CSS, that's not a problem at all. And then we use the style sheet here. So let's call that app.component.css. Now, again, what I want you to do is go ahead to day 11 in the GitHub repository, right? So go to Git, open up day 11 commit and copy everything from the app.component.css, which will look like exactly this. So here we got some information, some header for footer a tag, and yeah, so everything that we need so far. And as I said earlier, this course is about development, not about styling. So we will not go through a real in-depth course on CSS and all of this, because we really want to focus on the more advanced development topics. Now we have that CSS. Now switch over to appcomponent.html and do exactly the same thing. So go ahead to the Git commit for day 11 and copy everything you can find in the appcomponent.html and paste it in here. Now again, let's real quick take a look at it. You got the body, you got the app nav menu, that was here before. That one is added new, so we got the header here. If you want to enter something, you can do that. We got the div class container that was also here before, including the router outlet. And new, we got that footer here. And as you can see, that footer has some, well, sort of information about what's your LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Google, GitHub, all of this. You can have an icon here, for example, and your brand, and for sure we have a copyright. So just keep in mind, this is only for you to show you how you can add a header and how you can also add a footer to every page. So this is sort of, if you know that from a previous challenge, for example, the shared layout in ASP.NET Core MVC template. Okay, we're nearly done using that. Simply go ahead to the appcomponent.ts now. So here we have the TypeScript, and as you can see, we got the selector here and the template URL. The template URL is directed to app.component.html, and that's fine. And now we can use some styles. So go ahead and use style URLs equals to, or assign the value. You can assign it as an array if you want to have more than one, for example, app.component.css. So this is the file that we have just created, right? Our CSS file. Now save it and start the application now. All right, so this is what we got. So the footer is actually implemented completely. And here there should be an image. So we need to make some small adjustments to make that image appear in. So let's simply switch back to our project. Now what I want you to do is go ahead to appcomponent.css. Here in the header, you can see that we're using a background image, and that file should be located in assets, images, and the name should be plain.jpg. So go ahead into your source folder. Here you can see the assets folder, right? And inside here, if you open it up, you cannot see an image folder. So right click on it and add a new folder, call it images. And now go to the Git repository for day 11 again. Move in the directory to find the assets folder, right? It's in client app source and then assets. And inside there, you can find the image and you can download it and put it right inside here. So this is where you get the image from. Now I had that on my desktop and simply dragged it into that folder. So assets, images, and inside there is the plain .jpeg. So again, listen, you can find the JPEG inside of the GitHub repository in commit 11th day. Now everything should be working. We got that asset, images, plain JPEG, which is actually matching that path right here. Take a look at our angular.json file. Let me just close all of this here. And you can see angular.json on the right side. Open it up, scroll a little bit down, and here for me in line 96, you can see assets is defined here in source assets. So this is where the information is coming from, of where our images and all the stuff which should get rendered, well actually sort of like sound files, images, and all of this should be located, right? So just to show you where this is defined. So if you want to change it and you don't want to have that information in assets folder, maybe you want to call it files, you can go ahead and change it here. And then for sure you have to rename the folder. Great. So again, let's take a look at our app. Awesome. You can go ahead and take a look at this. You can even press Ctrl F5 to reload the page and clear the cache so that every CSS will new or freshly get applied. Great. So now our page looks way more like a real website just because of the image, which gives the user the sense of what are we actually doing here, right? So, okay, I guess this website is about anything with airplanes or flights. And then you have that list of flights, which is really nicely designed. And you got a serious brand identity footer, with some information. Before we proceed to implement the passenger flight booking list, so about which flights have I booked, let's implement input data validation, which is a key learning for you when it comes to Angular.